Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Compass Speaker Series at the Ted Rogers School of Hospitality and Tourism Management and the Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research here at Toronto Metropolitan University. Before we begin, I would like to start with our land acknowledgement. So currently I am in Oakville and I am on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, whom I acknowledge and thank for being stewards of this traditional territory. Toronto Metropolitan University is approximately 30 kilometers away in downtown Toronto. I would also like to acknowledge the land upon which Toronto Metropolitan University sits. Toronto is the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. The dish, or sometimes it is called the bowl, represents what is now Southern Ontario from the Great Lakes to Quebec, and from Lake Simcoe into the United States. We all eat out of the dish, all of us that share this territory with only one spoon. That means we have to share the responsibility of ensuring the dish is never empty, which includes taking care of the land and the creatures we share it with. Importantly, there are no knives at the table, representing that we must keep the peace. I realized I do have a presentation, which I should have put up to begin with. So I'm going to do that right now. So today we are chatting with Kelly Galaki, who is a very good friend. I was going to say old friend, but no one needs to know.
That's all right.
Very good friend that I've known for a number of years. And I'm really excited to have her here today because she started a new position at the Travel Foundation. So before we begin though, I just wanted to talk a little bit about our Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research. Our mission is to facilitate and conduct research of both scholarly value and significance to the tourism and hospitality field. We will mobilize knowledge to enhance the research reputation and impact of Toronto Metropolitan University, particularly in the tourism and hospitality field. The Compass Speaker Series is a initiative that we put together before COVID. We used to have these in person. And then once COVID began, like a lot of other people, we moved on to Zoom. I am feeling that many of us may be Zoomed out. And so we record these events and post them on our website at htmresearch.ca so that students and industry can come back and watch these webinars over and over again for years to come. So thank you for those who've joined us in person, but thank you for the ones who I'm speaking to that may be watching this at a later date. So we decided to, start this Compass Speaker Series, and we have been doing about 6 per year. And coming up, we have our director, Wayne Smith, in January, and we have Steph Klovchuk from Saskatoon from Saskatchewan Tourism in March. And stay tuned for some other guests that we will be welcoming. So Kelly Galaki is an alum of the School for Hospitality and Tourism Management at Toronto Metropolitan University. She graduated in 2001, and it's always nice to see where our grads end up and all the amazing things that they have been doing. She has been passionate, sustainable tourism professional for over 20 years across the hospitality, tourism, for-profit, and nonprofit sectors. For many years, she worked with rural and Indigenous community on community tourism experiences and enterprise development at Planeterra. Kelly also worked on the development of responsible travel policies and supply chain assessment systems to measure local impact and sustainability at G Adventures. And more recently, Kelly wanted to move out west, and she joined the Thompson Okanagan Tourism Association, who is a regional DMO in British Columbia, Canada, renowned for its innovative destination stewardship efforts, leading its tourism research division. More recently, however, Kelly is currently a sustainable tourism specialist on the programs team at the Travel Foundation, which is a leading international sustainable tourism organization working with destinations globally towards achieving climate positive and equitable tourism goals. And Kelly, if you wouldn't mind also talking a little bit about your journey. I mean, we talked about this, but pathways about how you got there, because one thing that we're going to mention is that Kelly also completed her master's in environmental studies at York University, where she conducted research in Costa Rica on community-based tourism. And I think, you know, as we are a research institute, that really, I mean, you were doing stuff before that, but I also feel like that kind of launched a lot of your interests, you know, for your career. So I always want to point that out because, you know, there's that discussion about what's with, especially among students and also with industry in terms of the importance of research and why, you know, how that can shape your passion and your interests over the years. So thank you, Kelly, for joining us. I know it's been a very busy week for you, and we are super grateful that you are here. And I am going to stop sharing here and let you start your own presentation.
Okay. Oops, it's at the end. Oh, there it goes. Perfect. Hi, everyone. Hi, Sonia. Thanks so much. It's great to be here at the Research Institute at my alma mater. Like you said, it's only been 21 years since I graduated, which seems pretty incredible. But yeah, I definitely thought I should share a little bit about my journey, especially for some of the students in the room or the future room on video. I started out really working in hotels and various positions in front office and even back office in accounting. And then, as you mentioned, returned in 2006 to do my master's degree in environmental studies. And I still loved tourism and hospitality, but really felt a calling towards environmentalism and wanted to marry those two passions of sustainability and sustainable development, and then was able to work with the Research Institute at York that has a base in Costa Rica that typically focuses on biodiversity research in the rainforest there. But I said, well, I'm a people and tourism person. What could I do? And we talked about the interest in community members there, particularly coffee farmers in developing community tourism there. And so that's what I worked on, was community tourism planning. And yeah, it really launched my first half of my career working for almost 12 years at Planeterra and G Adventures, and primarily focusing on the development of community tourism experiences, but also having a big role on the responsible travel policies and sustainability programs at G Adventures. And then, yeah, in 2020, I pivoted with the best of them into destination management and joined the Thompson Okanagan Tourism Association. And that was a huge learning curve to learn all things DMO and Canadian tourism industry. I'd been working internationally so far pretty much. And you know, the TOTA, as it's called for short, is one of the few DMOs in the world to have a dedicated destination stewardship program and role in-house. So it was a great launching point to then join the Travel Foundation here in 2022, this year. Made my shift to work with the Travel Foundation and destinations around the world. And my work is currently with Canadian and US based destinations. working on destination stewardship plans, essentially. We have components involving stakeholder engagement and developing new measures of success. Hence, I wanted to talk about that topic today with you all. So we'll get into that topic, balanced measures of success. So first starting, this is what we are familiar with in terms of the measures and what has served us for decades as measures of success: number of customers, number of visitors, number of rooms booked, number of groups or events booked, revenue earned, all related to volume and perpetual growth. But since it's essentially economic growth only, it's fairly narrow in terms of a real measure. And so for all these reasons listed here, seasonality, economic leakage, low margins, overcrowding, overconsumption, overdependence, fragile environments, exclusion and inequity and conflicts, and unhappy as well as non-existent workforces, and unaffordable housing and crises, including the climate emergency. For all these reasons, more and more destinations are seeing the need, and some desperately so, to achieve balance. So there's momentum around the concept that economic growth is not the only and really can't be the only measure of success, because tourism is literally being said to kill places. And to quote Visit Flanders, "The transforming 20s will be the decade in which we dare to change a view that has brought us progress, but that is now killing us slowly." There must be, what it comes down to is a counterbalance to the typical measures, and that comes from social and cultural, environmental, and mental well-being indicators. And the momentum and shift is also being driven by investors looking to manage risks, consumer attitudes and demand for sustainability, pressures from employees who want to work for companies that do better, and resident pressures and decreases in sentiment and tolerance, and as well as governments who are looking at ways to manage visitation and protect places that have been damaged. So in 2019, the Travel Foundation released a report with Cornell University and Epler Wood International entitled "Destinations at Risk: The Invisible Burden of Tourism," diving into many of these issues and highlighting that in many cases, the full costs are often not well understood, and so essentially left unaccounted for, which typically leads to degradation of resources and conflict in local communities. And because these costs are just left out of measures of success. So some examples of specific costs are, for example, upgrading infrastructure to deal with peak demand during high season from tourism, demand from tourism during high season, increased liabilities from climate-related costs in destinations that rely on coastal assets, seeing risks from weather events and sea level rise, the economic burden of residents that are no longer able to afford or even enjoy living in historic city centers, for example, because they don't feel they belong anymore or can't afford to live there. And these trends these issues didn't go away during the lockdowns of the pandemic. They just really shifted. Domestic tourism put huge pressures on coastal and green outdoor spaces, particularly in places that I'm working in here in Canada and the US, like Lake Tahoe and Vail, Colorado, and Vancouver Island. Just seeing the surges in visitation and not being able to deal with resulting impacts, like even additional trash that there's just not the resources to deal with. But just as we need to be more sophisticated about the burdens of tourism, we also need to be more sophisticated about understanding the values, and there are less visible benefits from tourism, that added value that tourism brings to the destination and residents. And many places put a lot of effort trying to communicate that value of tourism to their communities. For example, a sense of place and civic pride, living somewhere that matters to the world, having access to more amenities and events. I certainly know that in Kelowna, I'm happy to have a lot more restaurants here than I would if it was just no tourism existed here. Enhanced infrastructures, a lot of natural and historical assets are typically protected because of tourism, and it provides ability to attract new businesses and talent. But if we don't apply an equity lens, we can't say for certain that that value is being distributed fairly and inclusively. So what needs to change for places to be able to start identifying new measures of success? Essentially broader mandates, a shift to broader mandates for destination management organizations, and developing looking for ways that they can collaborate public-private innovation to understand their impacts and develop new measures together. And I'll give you some examples here of some destinations that are already in this shift. The Netherlands 2030 plan talks about more, not always being better, and wanting to shift from tourism as a goal to a means for communities. The Edinburgh 2030 strategy calls for a shift from driving growth to managing growth. And Amsterdam is interestingly setting not only upper limits of visitor numbers, but lower limits of visitor numbers, recognizing that there's a safe zone or ideal optimal situation in the middle where they want to reduce the number of visitors, but also not to a point where they lose all of those benefits from tourism. And I want to do a shout out to the regional destination management organizations here in BC, including TOTA and others that are developing a major data project to look at a full range of indicators across climate, including economic performance, number of Indigenous owned businesses, number of accessible businesses, and resident sentiment, and more. So we're essentially talking about a shift to a more democratic involvement of residents and collaborating across sectors outside of tourism, and moving more toward placemaking and identifying collaboratively ways to fund these challenges and the progress toward new measures. So I'll give you some examples of some destinations specific areas of measures that they're starting to use. So New Zealand, for example, is basing their measures of success around 4 Indigenous Maori principles of economic prosperity and well-being, shared respect, hospitality, generosity, and care for others, guardianship and sustainability, and a sense of family and belonging and working together. In Travel Oregon's new strategy, they focus on 3 lenses of stewardship, equity, and prosperity. And their new key performance indicators are around these pillars or lenses. For example, of course, including still economic impacts through employment and tax revenue, diversity of staff and investments that support Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC communities, resident and visitor sentiment, and environmental sustainability through reduction in greenhouse gases, new regenerative experiences that are developed and promoted, and how they empower their tourism industry to contribute to these goals. On Vancouver Island, Tourism Vancouver Island, that is now called 4VI, has a new set of social responsibility commitments that are under the pillars of businesses, communities, cultures, and environment, and will have new KPIs to measure the organization's progress toward achieving long-term outcomes and its own ability as an organization to deliver benefits, positive benefits to Vancouver Island. And they're also aligning their programmatic work to the Sustainable Development Goals. So what are some other balanced measures of success? What does it mean in practice, besides a couple of those I've started to share, and I have more examples to share as well. Looking at the impacts of visitors on communities, the burden of tourism on natural resources and built assets, and the distribution of tourism's benefits within the visitor economy. So, and specifically looking at diversity and inclusion, understanding risks and the mitigation of those risks, and then the contribution of tourism to the climate and ecological emergencies. And they essentially shouldn't all be one-sided, as not blunt volume-based economic measures, and should include, where possible, science-based measures related to environment and society. And it's not easy. It means data sharing with other agencies and businesses, and really depends on collaboration. And additionally, some barometer or early management, early warning signals can create, this is something that we are developing, and I'll share a bit more about some of our approaches, but to create an early warning management tool to essentially assess different carrying capacity bottlenecks like parking, or flashpoint issues like traffic and litter, resident and visitor sentiment feedback mechanisms. Another way to start setting targets and new measures is that a lot of businesses and destinations are starting to do, is to commit to the Glasgow Declaration to have their carbon emissions by 2030. So it sets a company up, or a destination, on a course for new measures for all areas of the business. You can look at work and programs and activities all through a climate lens, and using the 5 pathways of the Glasgow Declaration. If you review all of the work or areas, you can then develop new measures related to trying to achieve the reduction in carbon emissions. And I'll share a bit more about that later. Another great example of some creative KPIs that I want to bring people's attention to come from a Travel Foundation partner and colleague, Marco Lucero, and the team at Cuidadores de Destinos in Chile. They have been developing wonderful KPIs, and their approach is really interesting. They involve children as participants in visioning workshops to generate visions and tourism results in communities in Chile. And these are some of their latest wonderful KPIs. The number of women that feel safe walking home at night. I mean, certainly we would not typically think of this as a tourism measure, right? Percentage of ambient sounds that belong to birdsong. How well is the destination able to protect the biodiversity and ensure tourism is not encroaching on habitat and biodiversity? The number of public decisions that residents are part of, again, comes back to the shift to more democratic involvement of residents around tourism decision making. Another conversation that's happening a lot right now is about this move to from volume to value, and there's some destinations that are focusing on high spending visitors as a way to potentially reduce volume, and it's in a sense a move in the right direction to measure spend versus visitor numbers only, but we actually advocate for a model that optimizes a visitor mix and look at the costs and benefits of the different visitors in terms of their impacts, not just economic, so more of a quality tourism rather than seeking quality tourists. It's a bit of a nuance, but it moves from thinking about just marketing to the right tourists, but to managing your destination's assets. And it really means also being more inclusive and thinking about who all of your visitors are and could and should be. And then what do you need to do to maximize the positive impacts from their visits and reduce the negative impacts. And the Travel Foundation did a study about that in terms of high spenders versus not, and saw that hotels generate more revenue and jobs than apartments. So they're looking at different types of lodging, and also interestingly that tourists in 5-star hotels spend the most per day, but people that stay in 1 or 2-star apartments spent more on local bars and restaurants and shops. So it's definitely more nuanced and important to not consider value just in dollars when you're shifting from volume to value. So we've created essentially a strategic approach that we call the optimal value framework to help destinations work together to understand and look to optimize that value of tourism for their community. So to agree on balanced measures of success, prioritize impact areas most important for them to manage their resource those challenges sufficiently. It essentially helps them identify the different strategic levers that could increase the benefits and minimize the costs or negative impacts. And it's based around the values that tourism can contribute around economic, environmental, cultural, social, and even individual or mental values, which obviously tourism can contribute both positively and negatively in these areas. And we start with asking this question, a simple question, but profound question, which many communities are starting to ask themselves. Why do we want tourism? What do we value from tourism? What can tourism help us to achieve? And then when we set those goals, and we can really start to align measures of success. Part of our analysis includes looking at the current situation in the destination against our own impact framework that's aligned with the future of tourism guiding principles. So these are good starting points as well to develop more well-balanced and expanded measures of success. And the result of our analysis and work on the optimal value framework is basically generates a set of recommendations for better optimizing tourism in the destination, but also to be used to analyze new initiatives, and it creates a set of indicators, including some thresholds and early warning signals for a destination to use as a monitoring tool. So I'll just give an example. We're working in Vail right now through this model, and but also we've been working, I mentioned Tenerife and England's Peak District, and a bunch of different destinations around the world where using this impact framework to do the analysis and help develop some new indicators. In Vail, we've been working as part of a broader team on a destination stewardship plan. And we've been using the stakeholder engagement opportunities like public meetings and discussion groups and workshops and surveys to really hone in on the priorities and the key opportunities for Vail to better optimize or become a more balanced destination. And in Vail, the priorities really center around environmental and social values. It's worked really hard toward its sustainability certification and has done some incredible work across all areas of sustainability, but it does see key areas out of balance. From a social perspective, their resident access and satisfaction is suffering due to what a lot of destinations are suffering from at the moment, out of reach cost of living, leading to housing and workforce shortage crisis, and so declining livability. And then the energy use is quite outsized there for a small community because of the volume of visitors that they get, and they rely on a large scale snowmelt system for clearing roadways. So they're really looking at ways that they can get that under control as soon as possible, accelerating their goals to reduce emissions by 2030. And one of the things that we zeroed in on was the health of its watershed. It's got Vail is just with one creek running through, and that watershed is really central to Vail's identity, and it's of course threatened by impacts. And so part of the indicators that we've been working on developing include some early warning signals around climate and watershed protection, among the other impact areas that we've looked at, to really just help focus on achieving a more balanced system on the whole. And that is also a key point I want to make, is that destinations can work on many initiatives in sustainable tourism, but still be out of balance. So a process that helps identify the key signals of the destination's overall health, which can be turned into a monitoring tool or key measures, can help the destination prioritize and drive its investment toward stewardship activities and areas for collaboration across sectors to work towards achieving these measures together. These things are not super easy to do alone, and collaboration is really the key. And lastly, I want to leave you with a message about something you can do today to start looking at new targets for your business or destination by signing the Glasgow Declaration. Just a short video.
Great, thanks, Kelly. So I have a question before we begin. And then with all of you, if you want to start putting any questions you have for Kelly in the panelist question part, that would be great, and I can moderate. My question is, so whereas all this stuff is very nice and well and good in terms of declarations, by signing that declaration, how can we ensure that there's actually movement? Like, you know, you and I have been working in this for 25 years. We started an NGO, I don't know, like 16, 17 years ago on climate change. We've been talking about climate change. But at what point, like declarations are all well and good, but what concrete initiatives are there? Like, just because you sign a declaration doesn't mean you're actually going to reduce anything.
Yeah, so the declaration itself requires a commitment to develop a climate action plan within the first 12 months. So it's actually there is a monitoring system in place. I mean, yes, it's not legally binding, of course, but organizations are working on their plans and publishing them, and then making commitments within their businesses or their DMOs or however, whatever kind of organization it is, to have their first year plan. And then the idea is that it's monitored by the UN WTO program called the One Planet Network, and the Travel Foundation is an implementing partner. And part of it is the program is developing guidance around planning, and the idea is to really follow those signatories and have peer-to-peer discussions and learning. And it's definitely not just a sign off and go along your way. It's an active program.
And there's assistance, because I think that
Yeah,
very necessary. And I feel like all industries are kind of getting pigeonholed in certain things, like ESGs, for example, but kind of missing out on, like the actual implementation of plans.
yeah.
So it's fine to have plans, but but how do you actually implement? And my other question then is, again, people, professionals that we've worked in certification for such a long time as well, and we know that certification has its own issues. How can you then, so your Travel Foundation is helping in terms of developing the plan, but where do you think we can go with this as a tourism industry, right? Like when we see things like climate issues are, or emissions are going up X% by 2030 soon. So like, where's the urgency, I guess? Because I'm feeling a little disconcerted these days that, that there's a lot, well, not these days, but that there's always a lot of talk and very little action. So how, I want to know, like, what is the plan, or what's Travel Foundation doing to really push that agenda and to get the organizations to understand that there is an immediate need, not, let's talk about this for another 20 years.
Yeah, well, the big thing that, and the approach, we don't do plans, it's more about the capacity building to help people do their own plans so that they're actually accountable. They're building it into their own business plans. For example, we don't want it to be like a tick box where people have, okay, we've done this plan and it's separate and move on to something else. So for example, when we worked with Visit Scotland and some of the DMOs on a pilot project to develop the climate action guidance tools that are being developed now in time for COP27, we had discussions with the DMOs that are different sizes, shapes, some of them are very small organizations, nonprofit organizations, a few staff, their mandate may be quite small. So we look at, okay, what's in your sphere of influence? What can you control? What do you do already? So understanding, I think, and this kind of goes to Deb's question Deborah's question in the Q&A about what a small operator can do. If you think about your own ability to act, like in your realm, and then who you can influence. So for a DMO, maybe their own footprint isn't that large, but they have an influence of this audience of all kinds of businesses. So what should be the actions that they could take place, and not necessarily get bogged down in thinking of 10-year plans, but what can they do immediately to actually influence? because you're right, it's an urgent situation. So creating a 10-year plan or 30-year plan or 50-year plan, sure, it's good, but what are the immediate steps you can take? So that's really, I think the point of view that we have is it should be also related to what your work and your mandate is and your goals already are. Can you look at all of your activities that you do through a climate lens and make adjustments quickly, rather than have it be this completely separate project that you have to do or invest in? I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
I kind of wish we could figure out, we could have Deb actually join this conversation, because I also feel, I'm curious, Deborah, which small island in the South Pacific?
Oh, it's Papua New Guinea.
Oh, okay.
I know Deborah a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, Papua New Guinea. Well, like a lot of my work is in small island destinations, and what we talk about, the immediate need is extremely immediate. Like, we're talking about moving entire communities because of sea level rise, and hurricanes and erosion, sewage issues, waste issues, right? So, what do you suggest for, areas that may not have DMOs, how can stakeholders work together in these small islands? Because Deborah, for example, what initiatives can, she take, not only as a small tour operator, but, working in conjunction with other people on the island?
Yeah, well, there's two pieces to that. One of them is the collaboration, recognizing, so a DMO that is small and doesn't necessarily have any influence itself over how the sewage system is, or the building codes, for example. We really strongly advocate for that cross-sector outreach and collaboration, looking at is the government already working on climate action in any way? Is there some way to bring the tourism sector into the conversation? Because tourism is so often left out, but there's a big audience, a big generator of both business and impacts. And so, recognizing that this can't be done by tour operators on their own or by small DMOs, and the government needs the involvement of the private sector. So reaching out to and maybe that's your role as a DMO or a small tour operator, is actually joining forces and coming up with collaborative plans to work together on it.
On a grassroots level, right? Like, because as Deborah said, the government support really, like the work that I've done in Fiji or in Indonesia, there is no government support. There's no government. The government is not playing a role, especially, in kind of the smaller, maybe destinations on a particular island. So, how then do you drum up support, create collaborative initiatives, have things happen, right? Like that has to be done by the people who are living there collectively, trying to figure out these initiatives, because as Deborah says, government support is not as robust. I like your way of phrasing, as other countries. Government funding is not always available for small businesses. So can't always. The government, I think, is the one, many times that potentially, is, people look towards the government and look towards potential for policy, but like on the ground, I don't know what your experiences are, like, it's just not available. It's not there. So, I think that would be my answer as well. It was a collaborative framework. I just wish there was more resources and funding for, the grassroots ground up initiatives. and how do you access them, right? So do you know, or do you have any resources as a travel foundation that, you know, someone like Deborah could, you know, look at, follow, you know, some low-hanging fruit initiatives, perhaps, where to start?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Certainly joining the Future of Tourism Coalition community. It's a way to start talking to peers and looking at the guiding principles there and thinking of ways that that could be small steps like Deborah's asking about. Also, yeah, signing on to the Glasgow Declaration to join that community and start receiving the updates, going to the workshops, getting pointed to resources for initial plans and ways to essentially create more of a louder voice and call to action, because that's what we feel like the more organizations that can join globally. And there is actually a lack of organizations from the Global South right now as signatories, partly for this reason. There's just less resources available in a lot of cases to take this on, right? But we would like to see support for some new without saying too much detail yet, but some new programs that would support some Global South destinations to be able to participate. So we have some things in the works, and you know, targeting bigger funders to be able to support not just Global North DMOs that are already going down this path, but Global South too, and more so, right? So, but yeah, I definitely encourage joining those two, because then you're just automatically part of a community that you can learn from and start adding your voice to make the voice bigger. And you know, so many governments like Finland just signed the Glasgow Declaration and brought 60 of their DMOs along for it. So it's like, as it grows and more join, that voice gets louder and becomes a more powerful argument to do more.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting that from a country perspective that happens. And you know, like maybe you need to be at TIAC with a giant booth and a big megaphone screaming. And everybody there needs to join, because it's a bit, like I said, you know, like it's becoming much more amplified. But I do think that's a good idea to have that collective action, that collective voice, and maybe then, you know, people will be heard. But I'm still surprised, you know, that there's still a big part of the tourism industry that still needs things like sustainability primers, or,
yeah,
you know, what is climate change, or you know, what does this, you know, what does all this mean? I know that when I talk to event planners, and I'm sure you get asked to speak a lot at things as well, you know, they say the concept of sustainability or climate change is number one. It's what members always ask for. It's what they want to know about. But how are we, you know, like things like declarations are good to bridge the gap. But I guess also in your very, you know, in your experience, you know, over 20 years of doing this, you know, what would you like to see as, say, something, your legacy, right? Like if there's one thing that you could do to make all this happen, or if you're like, I really wish this was implemented, or you just hear yourself saying it over and over again, like, you know, what would that be? It's a big question, but you could do it.
Well, I think if people get bogged down in the idea of not knowing where to start, particularly around measurement, for example, I think that there's a way to look at it that is, you don't want to be paralyzed. What is it? Analysis paralysis, right? You don't want to stop action just because you think you have to go in a certain order. Like, I would say, okay, yes, measurement is important to know where you stand, but actually reverse engineering it a little bit and looking at what you can do that you know will make an impact. And maybe if you don't have the resources to do a full-blown measurement to understand your carbon emissions, for example, maybe that's okay. And you know, start small with practices that you know are going to make it. There's enough resources out there that you know you can start. And so I would just like to see people not use an excuse that it costs money or things like that, because we know that the benefits it brings. We know that when you align your business around purpose and doing good, that it brings good in all senses of the word, monetarily, as well as your image, as well as happiness of your employees and customers. And so, yeah, I admire the companies that are out there really shouting that out, because they know and they're doing well. I mean, the businesses that are doing the best are making the most change. And so, yeah, no more excuses.
And attracting people, right? They're the ones who are attracting
Exactly.
the good workforce, right? And that's always the discussion.
Yeah.
In tourism, right? And you know, everyone's like, well, there's no people. Well, let's really think about why you know, people are leaving tourism for other industries. And you know, I love what Explorers Edge, you know, in Muskoka is doing, because they're really focusing on regenerative tourism, in the sense that they are looking at how they're going to retain their employees, right? Giving them, you know, places to live, you know, that are affordable, making sure that they have like longevity so that they'll stay in the community, become part of the community, giving support to their international you know, employees that are moving there, right? They want to attract good people. And you know, that may be, some people may not understand that as being part of sustainability, or regeneration, or whatever you want to call it. But it is, right? Because, you know, that's going to create a better destination and people who are actually caring about the community that they live in. So do you have any other examples maybe of great places that you're like, I love what, you know, you gave a bunch, but like, what's the one that you're like, I love this destination. Like, I love Explorers Edge. Like, you know, I think they're doing great stuff.
I don't know. I should have. I gave a bunch of examples earlier. I'm trying to think of something that I've seen recently.
Like, everyone talks about TOTA. Everyone talks about Victoria, like Vancouver Island. Like, you know, is there something that you're just like, yeah, that's
yeah, I mean, I think that there's elements in a lot of places, and I know that I've seen things recently that I've thought were amazing, but I don't know, I'm drawing a little bit of a blank in terms of the one one thing I would point people to right now.
Sure, there's lots on the like Travel Foundation. Like, you gave lots of examples that are available for people to kind of look into. So So we'll direct people there. So, so we're almost at the end of our hour, and I was just wondering if there was anything that you wanted to add. You know, I think advice to, you know, small tour operators like Deborah, or, you know, whoever's watching this, big organizations. I'm actually, you know, I was taking copious notes because I think that they're really good messages to give, you know, in a variety of circumstances, right? So is there anything that, you know, sign the Glasgow Declaration, that I think is
yeah, I think too, looking at a simple place to start is looking at your work that you already do through the lenses of sustainability or climate and equity, and what can you change? So is it a tweak to your marketing messaging? Is it tweaks to purchases? You know, looking at those future of tourism guiding principles. What are some things that you could change relatively easily at first? Because the more you do, the more you progress, the more, you know, you see change right away. But yeah, not to just be paralyzed and thinking you need to go out and hire a consultant, or you need to do this massive process. You know, just looking at what you already do and what you need to do for your audience, whether that's members or that you represent, or, you know, business owners or stakeholders or shareholders or whatever the case is. But how can you change the lens? Look at all of it, and because it's a really good way to start, and it helps you see that, you know, we're not telling DMOs you can't market anymore. You have to go away from that. I mean, that's their mandate, to be marketing organizations. So what can they do differently? What's in they already serve their stakeholders. They provide information. They support them during times of crisis. So this is a crisis, whether ecological and equity and climate crises. And so what are the tools that you can build into the support that you already give to those businesses that you serve? So you know, there's sometimes a misperception that we're saying that destinations have to just focus on stewardship, and that means no longer doing what they currently do. Absolutely not. It's just it's a shift in mindset into how you can actually, what are the impacts affecting your place or your business, and what can you do to affect change? And then who might you need to partner up with or reach out to, whether it's your own peer community in terms of businesses, or it's across sectors. In Vail, there's a 20 organization plus destination steering committee that's made up of everybody, private sector, all levels of government, NGOs. They're all working together to identify the priorities and all taking on commitments for implementation. Likewise, in Lake Tahoe, we're working with 15 organizations, again, cross-sector, from the conservation organizations to the planning agencies to the Forest Service, that have recognized the urgency to make change in their destination. And it's not easy, but they are certainly going to achieve a lot more working together. Mm. And so those are pretty inspirational examples that they know that what they're doing is not easy, but that they have no choice. they have to, because ultimately, eventually, then the businesses all suffer too, because if a destination is degraded enough and the experience is degraded, then what do you have left, right? So
that's the message I think that has to always get across, right? Is that, you know, it's not talking 50 years or 100 years anymore. Yeah. Talking immediate need, And you also don't want disgruntled public. And I like what you said about, the public lens as well, and looking at, I mean, I worked on a lifestyle indicator, I guess it was called, like in the early 90s, right? So, right, like wrapping your head around what does that mean? It's not about economic indicators. So it's nice that you guys bring that up too, because I think we have to think differently of what's important to us. So thank you so much for this. I really appreciated your time and your insight. I'm sure this will be shared far and wide, and be watched for years to come. I'm glad you joined our library of speakers, because I always value what you have to think, and I'm sure everyone does as well. So thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And take care. I also wanted to say, just keep in touch for our next speaker series. And please look at htmresearch.ca for previous Compass speakers and for schedule of upcoming speakers. So take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.